Hi there, history fans, and welcome back to another reaction video where we try to learn something new and to spread history on YouTube. Okay, so today we have the video called The Cold War from Oversimplified Part 1. If you want to support this channel, just click the subscribe button and the ring bell. Don't forget to take part in the polls. They're gonna be up in the upper corners of the video. And also, I appreciate your take on this topic in the comment section below. All the ways you can support the channel are described in the description below, so check it out. Also the Patreon page and everything. And without further ado, let's just jump into the video. And also, I'm gonna give, like my opinions and additional information that I have. So, okay, Oversimplified.
We go. Boom. New minimalist and Cold War merch available now, and get the new limited edition Churchill character pin before it sells out, with more characters coming in the future. Link in the description down below.
And of course, the description for the original video, the link to the original video is in the description, as always.
The year is
Give them a like and a view.
Fighting rages on the Eastern Front of the First World War. Both Germany and Russia are on the brink of collapse. Soldier, I need you to bring me this man. Got it. Found him, sir. What? No, not Lenin. Lenin, the Russian communist. What? Why would I need a beetle? Lenin, the Russian communist. He was exiled to Switzerland. You know what? I'll do it myself. Who wants to start a revolution?
Cool intro.
The Germans put Lenin on a train and sent him all the way back to Russia, hoping he and his mates would create an internal crisis. And create an internal crisis they did. The government was overthrown, and Lenin was in charge. He immediately pulled out of the First World War, made the country communist, started a 3-year-long civil war, got shot, broke the economy, caused a famine, and then he died. On his deathbed he said,
Lenin was actually exiled from Russia because of his extreme ideas. To Switzerland, and actually a lot of let's call it famous historical figures during the First World War and interwar period and so on were exiled to Switzerland. Maybe besides Lenin, also one of the famous one is Mussolini, and they actually met also in Switzerland because Mussolini was first a staunch socialist and anti-war and so on. But yeah, the Germans gambled with Lenin in sending him to Russia because they thought, yeah, he's gonna bring some turmoil inside of the state, which will then kick Russia out of the war, and then we can focus more on the Western front, so the French front. But yeah, and eventually it paid out.
"Hey man, tell whoever's in charge of giving people jobs not to let that jerk Stalin become the next leader. By the way, who did I put in charge of giving people jobs? That would be Stalin, sir." Stalin was a rising force in the Communist Party. He still had some opponents, but conveniently, all of them were arrested or disappeared. So that was lucky. And so Stalin took over. He implemented his 5-year plans, which transformed the country from an agriculture-based economy to an industrial one. And like Lenin before him, he reigned with terror. Anyone who dared criticize or oppose him would either be killed or left to rot in the horrendous Soviet work camps. Then a short man with a silly mustache tried to take over the world, punched the Russians all the way to Moscow, and then the Russians, with some help from their faithful ally, the Winter, punched them all the way back to Berlin. At this point, being allies, America, the UK, and the Soviet Union were good chums. They held a couple of conferences near the end of the war to decide what would happen next. "Hey Stalin, after all your trials and tribulation, you must be pretty happy to be standing here in Berlin. Tsar Alexander made it all the way to Paris. Just give me a second. Hey man, I think something's up with Stalin. I know, right? What should we do? Shall I tell him about the bomb? Yeah. Tell him about the bomb. That will scare him." So, we got this crazy new big A-bomb that can destroy an entire city in one go. Yes, my spies told me already. Oh wait, I meant to act surprised. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, they infiltrated.
Am I sure I want to send nuclear secrets via unsecure public coffee shop Wi-Fi? Am I ever? Dude, use a VPN. And speaking of VPNs, if...
Yeah, just before the thing. Stalin and his spies, they already infiltrated the Manhattan Project, so the project for developing the atomic bomb, and maybe one of the famous ones that was also caught was Klaus Fuchs. Look him up; it's a very interesting story. But then eventually he got caught by the Brits. He was in Britain, and then he was a German who got into exile to Great Britain. But eventually he got caught and was sentenced to, I think, 17 years in prison. But he couldn't be sentenced for longer because, well, in that time, the Soviet Union wasn't a, let's call it an open enemy. So they're still like, hey, we're allies and we're fighting against Germany. And eventually Fuchs then went to Eastern Germany and went back to Germany after the war. But yeah.
Like me, you take internet safety seriously, then you need NordVPN. NordVPN hides your online activities from outside intruders, preventing anyone from stealing your personal data and stopping your service providers selling your data to advertisers. With over 5,000 servers in 62 countries, it allows you to surf the net anonymously and securely. And it's simple to use. With just a click of a button, you can connect to a server halfway across the world, even allowing you to access streaming services from that specific territory. Say, for example, you wanted to watch a certain oversimplified video that for some reason has been blocked
that was
in your country.
blocked
With
in
NordVPN, you can. It works seamlessly across PC, mobile, and tablet. Go to nordvpn.com/oversimplified to get an amazing 75% off. That's just $2.99 per month with an additional month free for a limited time. So again, that's nordvpn.com/oversimplified, also in the description box down below. Now where were we? Oh yeah. Does the A stand for atomic or ass? Then America dropped their big A-bomb on Japan, and World War II officially came to an end.
Hiroshima and
Hooray,
Nagasaki.
we won! Okay, so now it's time to establish the New World Order. Stalin, you're in charge of Eastern Europe. Now, we want you to let them all hold elections. Oh yes, of course, elections. And these elections will be free and fair, right? Oh yes, certainly, free and fair. Definitely free and fair. Communist, 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 communist. If that's not free and fair, I don't know what is. Throughout Eastern Europe...
Yeah, so maybe the most famous conferences are Tehran Conference, the Yalta Conference, and the Potsdam Conference. And on the Yalta Conference, they kind of divided the influence spheres, like between the US, so the West and the East, and Eastern Europe. I mean, the Western countries under the United States of America, and the East under the Soviet Union, and they decided like, yeah, all the Eastern European countries are going to come under the influence of the Soviet Union. But yeah.
Soviet puppet governments were established as a buffer zone between the USSR and the West, with Churchill proclaiming an Iron Curtain had descended across the continent. The relation...
Yeah, but with the Iron Curtain...
between the...
Why can't I go back? Yeah, with the Iron Curtain, the communists and Stalin had an excuse for that. So the West were saying, yeah, they're like building that Iron Curtain and they're enslaving the people in the East and so on. But Stalin had a counter to that, and he said, well, if you look throughout history, Russia was invaded like 2-3 times from Europe, from Western countries, 2 times from Germany, so World War I, World War II, and also a big thing in, let's say, the Russian history or culture and so on, is also the Napoleonic Wars. So, and we all know that Napoleon also attacked Russia and came all the way until Moscow. But yeah, they were like saying, no, we're building it up to defend ourselves against the West.
Descended across the continent. The relationship between the old allies was deteriorating fast. Over the next few years, the British intervened in the Greek Civil War to prevent a communist takeover. In Turkey, the Russians began demanding more control of Turkey's sea access routes, which prompted the US to send their largest battleship to Turkey for a friendly visit. After World War II, Iran was now...
Just something on the Greek Civil War. As I said in a previous video, like Greece was very important for the Western states, especially Great Britain, because they see that as a country where democracy and the values that they have and so on originates from. And because of the previous conferences, they already decided that Greece is going to be under the influence of the Western powers. So Stalin actually didn't intervene that much in Greece, but a country that did intervene a lot in the Greek Civil War was Yugoslavia, which in 47-48 was kicked out of the oh my God, what is the name? Like the Cominform, so the like a legislator or whatever, forget it, but they were kicked out because they were supportive of the Greek communists, and the Greek communists and socialists were a big part in the Greek resistance movement during the Second World War, so they had a lot of influence there. But eventually the Greek socialists and communists lost because the Soviet Union didn't want to intervene that much. And yeah, Yugoslavia was kicked out of the Cominform because of that.
Occupied by both the Soviets and the British, with an agreement to both pull out once the war was over. The British pulled out. Stalin was like, you know what? I think I might stick around. All in favor of kicking Russia out of Iran? You want to know something? You guys suck. Pressure from the UN forced the Soviets to leave, and with the establishment of NATO, the Soviets had no doubt that the West was out to encircle and destroy them. And America announced the Truman Doctrine, in which they basically said, those guys are not cool, cannot be trusted, and we will do everything we can to prevent the spread of communism around the world. Many view this moment as the official declaration of the Cold War. Back in Europe, everyone was living in a post-apocalyptic void brought on by the Second World War. Cities reduced to rubble, not enough food. It was terrible. This is great. The more they suffered, the more likely it is they'll turn to communism. Dude, you're really messed up. What's wrong with you? My father used to punish me severely. America realized what was going on and quickly made a move. Under the Marshall Plan, they sent $12 billion to Western Europe for its economic recovery. The countries of Stalin's Eastern Bloc looked on with envy.
Yeah, so eventually with the Truman and with the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, eventually the U.S. said, like, we're going to do everything possible to prevent the spread of communism throughout the world. And the Marshall Plan was actually more effective in that because it gave more prosperity, especially on the European continent. I mean, in the western part. And Europe was, during the Cold War, Europe was more of a, let's say, a playground for the two ideologies, like communism on one side and capitalism on the other side, where they tried to prove that their that their system is more superior to the other. And as the US pumped more and more money with time, like the Eastern countries were like, yeah, that's probably a better version of economic systems or whatever.
Hey, Czechoslovakia, you want to come get some economic aid? Yeah, but I have to check with my mom first. Sorry, America. I can't come. This was a full-on economic battle raging between capitalism and communism in Europe. If the Western nations developed faster and better than the East, that would be a defeat for Stalin. So he set up his own rival economic recovery plan, which he called Comecon, and he also set up Cominform, which gave him more political control over the Eastern Bloc. But nowhere did this...
But as you saw, like, they didn't control Yugoslavia because they broke up.
Economic battle raged harder than in the city of Berlin. Caught over 100 miles behind Soviet lines, the city had been divided up between the Allies, and the western segments were still under Western control. East Berliners could travel freely to West Berlin, see the economic prosperity and think, maybe this communism thing ain't so great after all. I'm gonna have fun tonight. You're home late. Oh, Stalin. I was just out with my friends. Friends? You stink of capitalism. You're out engaging in imperialist debauchery again. I swear, Ivan, I can't keep doing this. Stalin wanted the West out. So he said, hey,
Ivan,
guess what? I'm blockading all of your supply routes to West Berlin. What are you going to do about it? I suppose we'll just fly the supplies.
Yeah. the airlift. A great achievement
All right,
for the
you
Western
win this
powers.
round. The Berlin airlift was an incredible undertaking and a major success for the Western Allies, and Stalin ended his blockade of West Berlin. His aggressive actions worried the West, but not as much as this did. The Soviet Union had developed their very own atomic bomb. The USA no longer had a nuclear monopoly. The world now knew that if a major war broke out between the two superpowers, it would be more destructive than anyone could imagine. So it was comforting when Stalin came out and said that war between the Soviet Union and the West was unlikely. Oh, wait, inevitable. He said it was inevitable. Hey, you know who I haven't checked in on in a while? My good friend China. Whoa, what happened to you? What happened to them was a full-blown civil war that had been going on since 1927. The People's Liberation Army, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, successfully defeated the Republic of China, who fled to Taiwan. The now communist China and the Soviet Union signed a mutual defense treaty. This was terrible news for the West. But wait, there's more. After the Second World War, Korea was...
Yeah, just a quick note on China, a big civil war after the from the time of let's say the First World War. So as he said, 1927 onwards, like China was ravished by a civil war between the Communist Party and, let's call them, the Royalists. So the national government. But and they by the invasion of the Japanese during the Second World War, they worked together to fight the Japanese. But then eventually they started to continue the fight with each other. And as we all know, like, the Communist Party won eventually, and the nationalist government was forced to evacuate with civilians and the army and so on Taiwan. And that's a big topic today still. But now we know why Taiwan is Taiwan. And yeah, the taking of or the victory of the communists in China was actually a very big shock to the Western powers, because China back then had also the biggest population than any other country. So you can say a big population, the biggest part, or the country with the biggest population is now a communist state. And the US was fearing okay, communism is spreading really, really fast. And
This was terrible news for the West. But wait,
it was a
there's
shock
more.
for
After
them.
the Second World War, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel. In the north, the Soviets set up a communist regime. In the south, America set up an anti-communist regime. Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators, and both dreamed of reuniting Korea under their own regime. Now that he had the bomb, Stalin was feeling a little more cocky, and he finally gave Kim permission to attack. The North launched a surprise invasion of the South on June 25th, 1950. With Soviet aid, the North Koreans steamrolled through, taking Seoul in just 3 days and replacing one ruthless dictator with another. The UN were freaking out and quickly created an emergency force made up of troops from 16 countries to defend the South. The West still held Busan and made landings at Incheon near Seoul. They pushed the North Koreans out of Seoul, replacing the ruthless dictator that had replaced the first ruthless dictator with the same ruthless dictator that had previously been replaced by the new ruthless dictator. And the West then continued all the way up the Korean peninsula. At this point, China was getting worried that the UN may just keep going. The US had sent this guy to lead the operation. After winning the Pacific theater of World War II, General Douglas MacArthur's head was big and his balls were bigger. He reassured President Truman that there was absolutely no way at all that the Chinese would ever get involved. Meanwhile, 500,000 Chinese troops were crossing into Korea. Nuke 'em. No. Nuke 'em. No. Ah, come on. You're fired. The US
Yeah. As far as I know, the public opinion of General MacArthur was really, really positive, because he was a big figure during the Second World War, as was Eisenhower, who became later on president. But eventually, because his willingness to use the atomic bomb in the Korean War, the public opinion kind of shifted, and then it was 50-50. Either you hate him or love him. But yeah, if you're an American, I would like to hear your opinion on that. That's as far as I know.
Nuke 'em. No.
And yeah, what we also forget about the Korean War and afterwards the Vietnam War, the parts of Vietnam and Korea that were supported by the West, they also were ruthless to their citizens and people inside of their country. So yeah, that's good that they pointed out like that the South Korean government wasn't like that they weren't angels, and also neither were the South Vietnamese during the Vietnam War. But yeah.
Nuke 'em. No. Ah, come on. You're fired. The US considered the nuclear option, but now that the Soviets also had the bomb, they didn't want to risk all-out global destruction. The communists pushed the West right back almost to the exact same spot they had all started from, and they ended up in a stalemate, where they remained until both sides finally agreed to work towards a peace settlement in 2018. Back in America, Americans decided they wanted a new president who would be tough on communism, so they elected famed World War II General Eisenhower, who was really hard to draw. It's 1953. Hey, Stalin, how you doing? Oh, he's dead. He had a cerebral hemorrhage, and his reign of terror kinda came back to bite him in the ass, because he had imprisoned all of his best doctors, and those that were left were too terrified to treat him. The new leader, Nikita Khrushchev, called a meeting and said, "Hey guys, you know how Stalin was imprisoning and murdering us all for doing basically nothing? Yeah, he was kind of a jerk. I'm really not sure how this is news to you." Khrushchev went on a campaign of de-Stalinization. Statues of Stalin were taken down.
His famous secret speech where he criticized Stalin. Eventually this speech got out. I'm not sure if it was on purpose or not, but eventually the speech was spread publicly, and that was really confusing for the people, but they were like, yeah, he's kind of right. And the process of de-Stalinization, it happened. I'm not sure if they're going to mention Stalingrad, but Stalingrad was then renamed to Volgograd, and he wanted to destroy the cult of personality that Stalin kind of built. But we need to take into account that to become the leader of the Soviet Union, you kind of needed to be a dedicated communist. And during his rule, he showed that he is a dedicated communist, like in the Soviet terms or whatever you want to call it, especially in Eastern Europe, where there were a lot of unrests and uprisings and revolutions that he eventually crushed. But yeah.
Stalingrad was renamed, and Khrushchev announced that he wanted the Soviet people to be happy and would allow greater freedom in the Soviet Union. So how did that work out? Well, an uprising in East Germany was brutally suppressed, a revolution in Hungary was brutally suppressed, and demonstrations in Poland were brutally suppressed. Although he did finally allow some mild reforms. Back in the Soviet Union, he permitted more cultural expression, but then began banning stuff based on his own personal taste. Modern art looks like a child urinated on a canvas. Banned. Jazz music sounds like the feeling of needing to fart. Banned. Your poetry is really depressing. How could anyone in the Soviet Union be depressed? You're banned. Khrushchev wanted the Soviet people to be happy, but not like that. Or that. Or that. Young people began enjoying abhorrent Western pop culture. Son, remove that disgusting imperialist apparel at once. Shut up, Dad. You can't tell me what to do. Well, would you look at that? Turns out he can tell me what to do. The West had initially liked the cut of Khrushchev's jib, but world events soon soured relations even more. The two sides...
I just wanted to point out something that a lot of people don't know. You all know the term, the first world, the second world, and the third world countries. First world countries, second world countries, and the third world countries. Today we use those terms into describing like the economic prosperity. Like first world countries are like, I don't know, the US, Western Europe, and so on. Then the second world countries are like the developing countries, like maybe some of the Eastern European countries that are transitioning to the capitalist states. So like states in transition. And the third world countries are undeveloped countries, mostly countries in Africa. But back then, the term was also used, but the term was used for like the first world countries are like the Western, like the NATO countries. The second world countries is the Soviet Union, and of course like the communist states and also the Warsaw Pact. But the third world countries were actually countries that were in the so-called non-aligned movement. So they didn't want to be part of either NATO or the Warsaw Pact. And one of the most famous countries are Yugoslavia and India, who pushed for the creation of the movement of the non-aligned. And yeah, third world countries was actually a description for countries that didn't want to side with any of the two opposing sides. And Syria, today Syria was also a part of the third world countries. Just a quick, I think, interesting side note.
Like the cut of Khrushchev's jib, but world events soon soured relations even more. The two sides were spying on each other a whole lot throughout the Cold War. The KGB had spies and informants in nearly every aspect of Western life and government, so much so that whenever the US tried to send spies into the Soviet Union, the KGB were usually ready to arrest them on the spot. Members of the Manhattan Project aided the Soviet Union in acquiring the bomb. Some American officials believed they were on the wrong side. I'll sell you 3 secrets for $5 million. Okay. Go ahead. The Allies are digging a tunnel under East Berlin to tap your communications. There's an American agent living at this address in Moscow, and sometimes, when I'm home alone, I like to put on my wife's dresses, sit in the corner, and cry for hours.
What?
Very interesting. In America, fear took hold during the Red Scare and the McCarthy trials. American values imploded as fear of communism collided with freedom of thought and expression, and communist kind of became a buzzword thrown around to describe anything people didn't like. Hollywood? Communist. Your next door neighbor's dog? Communist. When the grocery store cashier asks if you need a bag when you clearly can't carry 10 tubs of baconaise in your hands, communist. But one area in particular where the US had an edge over...
Yeah, Senator McCarthy and McCarthyism. Yeah, I think it's still used today. I think the term is still used today, McCarthyism, where you would accuse somebody without like real evidence and so on. But yeah, they feared the spread of communism, and eventually they crushed or spied on and interrogated people that they believed to be communists. And maybe two of the most famous people that were also caught into that spying investigation thing were Albert Einstein and Oppenheimer, so the father of the atomic bomb. So he was also in the loop, let's say it that way. But yeah, that's a big topic. Like the Soviets, also investigated and imprisoned and everything, people who were maybe critical of their government. But then on the other hand, with this, the US kind of did the same thing. I would like to know your opinion on that.
Over the Soviet Union was in its espionage technology. In particular, U-2 spy planes flew across Russia carrying out surveillance from the skies. There was a nasty incident in 1960 when one was shot down and Khrushchev was furious. Who the hell is this? He's a high-altitude weather enthusiast who flew off course. Okay, that sounds plausible. Wait a minute. Why does he have a gun and a poison needle? Because he's a very naughty high-altitude weather enthusiast. But much to America's concern, the Soviet Union appeared to be ahead in the space race. Everyone freaked out when Russia launched the world's first satellite, and then they actually sent a man into space. Even worse, there also appeared to be a missile gap in the Soviets' favor, and Khrushchev was so confident that he even allowed the US to set up a technology exhibit in Moscow, attended by a certain
Yeah, the question is always who won. I mean, we all say the US won the space race. Well, the Russians were the first ones to send a satellite, the Sputnik. So, and that also caused the Sputnik effect in the US, where the US government then encouraged people to inscribe to universities, especially the STEM fields, so that they get more scientists to catch up with the Soviets. They also sent the first, let's say, living being into space, like the famous dog Laika. They sent the first man to space, so Yuri Gagarin, and eventually, the US was the first one to land on the moon, and then everybody says the US won the space war. But I would also like to have your take on this topic. is it fair to say that the U.S. Won the space war just because they were the first to land on the moon? I don't know. It's always, for me, like the space war always sounds to me like moving the goalpost. Like, okay, who's going to be the first one to launch a satellite? The Russians. Who's the first one to launch or to have some living being in the space? Russians. Who's going to send the first man into space? Russians. Yeah, but the goal was to send people on the moon. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Vice President Richard Nixon. Check this out. We have color TV. Yes, but we've been to space and can obliterate you with our massive nuclear arsenal. Check out this vegetable peeler. Tensions increased further when both sides upgraded their atomic bombs to hydrogen bombs. And after West Germany was allowed to join NATO in 1955, Khrushchev set up the Defensive Warsaw Pact, strengthening the military ties between the Soviet Union and its satellite states. In 1960, Americans decided they wanted a new president who would be tough on communism, so they elected John F. Kennedy. The Soviet Union was advancing its technology, but it was also bleeding its coffers dry, and all of the money was going towards the military, not the people. Life under communism was still as hard as ever, and Berlin remained a thorn in the Soviet side. The contrast between the economically prosperous West and the struggling East was clearer day by day, and East Berliners were still able to freely travel to the West. Now, many of them were deciding to stay there. Millions defected to West Germany via West Berlin, causing Eastern factories to lose workers and taking a heavy toll on the economy. Soviet leaders decided this couldn't continue any longer. First, Khrushchev tried this: leave West Berlin, or else. Or else what? Or else, I'll be really mad at you. Yeah, no, we're gonna stay. Listen, man, West Berlin is ours, East Berlin is yours. That's just how it is. Kennedy felt pretty good about his show of American resolve. But wait a second, did you catch that? Let's replay it. East Berlin is yours. Uh-oh, Kennedy just told Khrushchev that the USA wouldn't interfere in what the Soviets did with their section of Berlin, so Khrushchev came up with a new idea. We're gonna build a wall, and it's gonna be a big, beautiful wall, and it's gonna keep out all the Mexicans.
What?
Oh, sorry, it's gonna keep in all the Mexicans. On August 13th, 1961, Berliners woke up to find their city divided into two, with barbed wire and guards blocking the border wall between East and West. Over time, a wall was constructed throughout the city. Families were torn apart. Thousands would risk their lives escaping over the wall, and hundreds would die trying. To the despair of Berliners, the West were unable to do anything about it, but the wall did put on full display the failure of the communist system. As Kennedy said, democracy is not perfect, but we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in. As part of the agreement between the two sides, U.S. diplomats were still allowed.
Yeah, but the thing, with the same thing happened with the Berlin Wall as did with the so-called Iron Curtain that Churchill described. So they were saying like there are a lot of U.S. spies coming to Eastern Berlin. They're infiltrating our society and so on, and they used the same defense in saying that it was a defense mechanism against the West. But yeah, the Berlin Wall, one maybe the most famous symbol of the Cold War.
Allowed to travel to East Berlin, but suddenly, East Berlin crossing guards started giving them the business, and Kennedy was like, nah. In October, the US rolled tanks up to the crossing point at Checkpoint Charlie as a show of strength. The Soviets did the same, and the two were in a
Checkpoint
standoff.
Charlie.
They stayed like that for 16 hours, and the world braced for nuclear
the
Armageddon.
most famous
Thankfully,
checkpoint.
Though, Kennedy called Khrushchev directly and was like, hey man, this is getting way too hot. How about you back your tanks up by an inch and we'll do the same? Sounds good. Okay, how about you back your tanks up by another inch and we'll follow suit? Alright, hey, you want to do another inch? And they both very slowly inched away from the apocalypse. Phew, let's hope that's the biggest crisis of my presidency. It wasn't.
So what did they say in 1961? I think that the Kennedy speech where he said, I'm a Berliner, ich bin ein Berliner, was in, I think, 1963, which was maybe one of the most famous anti-communist speeches like in the post-war era. But yeah, I think that the topic is very interesting, like the Cold War, and maybe one of the more biased topics in today's politics and history and so on. But we always need to see both sides, like as I said with McCarthyism, like okay, the Soviet Union did imprison people who were like pro-West and everything, but then the US kind of did the same thing with pro-East people or pro-communist people. Anyhow, I hope that you enjoyed it. We're also going to watch part 2, but later on, maybe today or tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to have the time to do part 2 today. If you like this, please hit the subscribe button. Don't forget the notification bell. And yeah, see ya.